G'day guys, welcome to Chewing the Fat. I'm here as always with the great Chris Bryson. And today we're joined by one of the people that I look up to most in the fitness industry. As he rolls his eyes. And someone I've wanted to get on the show since the day we started planning. So welcome Lyndon Purcell, a great man, a great thinker. Today we're going to pick his brain and I think we're going to chew some serious fat. So, Lyndon, welcome.
Thanks, Jimmy. That's a very nice introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and Chris, some guys I've known for a long time, I'm looking forward to it. Let's chew some fat.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Lyndon. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, mate. Can we start by just giving us a background on who you are, mate, what you do with yourself, and your career progressions to date?
Yeah, for sure. So for the first portion of my career, I guess I worked in the health and fitness industry. I was in the sort of S&C side of that originally. Coming out of high school, I was very interested in working with athletes, as most kids who are interested in sport sort of want to do. You always think the end goal is to work with athletes. So I was in S&C for a little bit. And then progressively moved into more just general population and sort of bodybuilding and powerlifting sort of style coaching and personal training. So yeah, worked for a company called JPS for a long time. And yeah, I think I really got a kick out of working in personal training. Working with Gen Pop people and population through personal training, because I really enjoyed the variety of problems that came with, and I really enjoyed dealing with people and helping them feel better about their lives in a very multifaceted sense, not just how I interacted with them in regards to diet and training, but just the bigger rocks that we always talk about in regards to like sleep and say mindset and all these generic terms that get thrown around a lot more than what they should. So I guess that was the first portion of my career. Got a couple of degrees in sports science, and now recently I've tried to build on a lot of the skills that I acquired from doing that kind of work and working with people and helping them build capacity and improve behaviors for the better. And now I'm working in support coordination role in the mental health sort of sector, dealing with psychosocial disabilities. That's, I guess, the quick or not so quick rundown on my career at the moment.
No, it's perfect, mate. It's perfect. And I just want to fill the listeners in on a little bit of a background on our meeting. I remember the first day that you walked into JPS. This is unfortunately actually, we are on YouTube. We are filming this, but Lyndon walked in and the first thing we said is that bloke has got the biggest glutes that we've ever seen. And immediately you were the Brett Contreras of Airport West. The other sort of, thing that stood out first, or secondly to your glutes about you was just your vast knowledge for a man who was still just in the midst of a degree, who hadn't actually had too many high upper roles within the PT sphere. I mean, you're walking into quite a well set up establishment in JPS, and you were already sort of taking charge of our education and our knowledge, and that led to you obviously being given the role of the education or the head of education at JPS. One thing that I'm interested in is the difference between formal and informal education. So someone who comes in with a university degree, or someone who comes in with, a mentorship or, some form of short course. How did you sort of build up your knowledge formally and informally? And if that doesn't make sense, you can let me know. But how do you then obviously teach if you don't have formal degrees, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jimmy. So thank you for that. It is a tough one. And it's something that I flip-flop back and forth on quite a bit. like the current degree I'm doing, that like this will be, you know, my third sort of go at the tertiary education setting, and I think I've had a different experience every time, which is not surprising. And sometimes I think, oh, like these what I'm getting out of this is just garbage. Like I could learn this so much better on my own, because, you know, the whole just like P's get degrees, and just like you're sort of optimized to pass these tasks that aren't relevant in a real world sense. And that can be, yeah, that can give you sort of, I think, a warped idea of how useful tertiary education is, or sort of like formal education, say. So there's that. And I would definitely say coming into that, you know, when we speak about like first meeting, like the knowledge I brought with me at that point, I would say was, you know, 95% self-taught or like informally taught. Like I would be, say, going to my classes when I actually went, but then like noting down like, okay, what's the bare minimum I need to do? You know, what's the sort of the essential 2 or 3 things this lecturer said so that I can pass. And then I'd go home and I'd be, you know, I'd probably walk to uni listening to a Danny Lennon podcast flat out. Then I'd go home and I'd read, you know, the first muscle and strength pyramids or whatever, like just doing all my sort of own self-study things, and then just be trying to use some of that information to pass my uni courses. So I guess I don't really have like an excellent answer for you, because I feel like I've taught myself a lot along the way in a sort of an informal sense. And I do really value my own informal learning. Like I don't, I guess I don't have partitions in my own mind and think, oh no, that's worth less because I didn't learn that at uni. It's just like, I feel like I know various things. I just try and be careful of what I was taught, or like what I think I know based on how I was taught it, if that makes sense. But yeah, I don't think I can discard the importance of just going through the tertiary education setting, or a formal sort of accreditation setting, not just tertiary education, but a lot more courses are started by people than are completed by people. You know, and the same sort of thing can be said by like starting books and not finishing books, or whatever. I think there is something valuable about people who are interested in learning about a topic and about a field and are willing to put in the work. It's not that the accreditation is the be all and end all, but it's those values that people hold. And I think they can manifest in a wide variety of different ways. I've said a lot there, so yeah, feel free to jump in.
I think it's one that probably in many industries, you know, that formal qualification, the tertiary education that, you know, allows you to step into a workplace, for example, and be qualified to do a particular job. Obviously, that's a necessity and a requirement to get a base level of knowledge, but it's that ongoing informal education that is arguably so much more important. And obviously, we're chatting to you today about, you know, knowledge in the fitness industry. And the fitness industry probably is a great example of that, where arguably it is relatively easy to get your formal qualification of a certificate 3, a certificate 4, and go away and practice as a personal trainer. But how far is that going to take you in terms of career success and development? Well, you know, maybe there's sort of a ceiling to that, whereas it's the informal education, that sort of passion for ongoing learning that, you know, obviously, mate, that strikes us that you've obviously got that, and it's something, you know, you very much enjoy and you're very passionate about, third uni degree. And you know, lots of different things we've already mentioned that I think, you know, separates the men from the boys, from a lack of a better term, in many careers. And I definitely see that in the physio world and in the world of healthcare, is that it's one thing to, you know, to have a degree and be qualified to do a job, but you know, I mean, I know from my experience, I learned so much more about my job and about, you know, healthcare in the first 6 months of just being in the trenches than I did 4 years in a uni degree. That, you know, I can't print out the first 6 months of experience and put it on my wall with a fancy looking master's degree, but arguably, you know, that's far more important. So yeah, I can sort of completely understand where you're coming from about that ongoing formal education and how that complements the formal stuff.
It's one thing that I always say in part of my role with working with young PTs and helping to mentor them is that the process of learning never stops. It doesn't matter whether it's a tertiary degree or a short course. It's then about applying that knowledge and then furthering the knowledge, and then something I'll get into a little bit later is kind of like pushing the boundaries of that knowledge and looking in I guess rival spheres of different concepts and things like that challenge that knowledge. But I also try to work out sometimes what the best way to encourage people to learn is. So I'm very interested in you letting us know how you learn best and what your favorite aspect of learning is. What makes you want to learn or educate yourself.
Yeah. So maybe I just might wrap a little bow around my previous statement. One of the reasons I engage with, say, like formal education or tertiary education or whatever we want to call it, some kind of structured course, is just because of the structure it provides.
Yeah.
That is probably like the major distinguishing factor or value that I see from, as well as sort of like the reputation benefits that might come with it, the reputation, the standards that are held, the standards that are set by something holding a reputation. So like a university has a certain reputation, so there's a certain standard to their content and it's structured. Like ultimately that's the major benefit and the reason why I say like I sign up for more degrees than really what I should. Like I don't think you should look down on anyone because they have, say, that in the trenches experience like you spoke about, Chris. Like that's so valuable. But if you've just had, say, in the trenches experience, it's like getting a bit of the other. They really do interact, and it's that amalgamation and realizing that you were so blind to the other side of the coin for so long that I think is really valuable. Sorry to monologue there. In regards to my own learning, what I enjoy about it and how I go about it, I feel like I invest a fair bit of time in the sort of the meta research or learning process of like, okay, I'm generally interested in this thing, be it, muscle physiology or software engineering or, discrete mathematics. I'm going to spend a pretty non-trivial amount of time working out, okay, where are the best sort of resources located on this topic? Like who holds a reputation in the field? What books have they written? And just, going through that sort of filtering process and then trying to double down on the high quality information. And that can look really different depending on what sort of field or sector you're in. It doesn't always have to be academic journals, I don't think. Like there is some absolutely phenomenal information on YouTube or, blogs these days. Like YouTube and blogs were sort of, cast aside for so long and spoken about as anecdotal evidence that wasn't, that's not held to any standard of quality. But the important thing is this information good? Not what format is this is this information taking shape in? So I guess I do try to read a lot of like forums and just research books, authors and big names in the field. And then over time you start to hear things again and again. And then I try and block it out at a certain point. Go, okay, I've decided this is what I'm going to learn. And I'm going to be open-minded to what knowledge this contains. Like, because you can always read a critique of a book or a critique of a paper and like, there's always another side to the story. But if you do, I think that sort of filtering process well enough, then you should have ended up with something that's reasonably valuable or perceived to be. And then you just go, okay, this has something to offer that I don't know. I'm going to be open-minded to it. It might challenge some of my preconceptions, but I'm going to go about it, learn it. And then once I've sort of assimilated it, then I'll start reading a few more of the critiques and be aware of like the failure modes of this style of thinking.
And it's sort of, like you said before, even just the YouTube video example, we are in an age now where there are so many more mediums of information and things are coming at us from everywhere and a lot quicker. And it sometimes comes down more to discerning or, working out between what could be a valuable source of information or what's, for lack of a better term, bullshit. And again, I think that's something that you've always encouraged. And I know working with you as well, you're very good at analytically looking at the two sides of the argument. And I think that does come down to, your desire to learn, to listen, and then also, sort of pedal through the mud of information that's out there. One of the best concepts that you and I have discussed before is the concept of echo chambers. And how the information, well, you actually, you could probably describe the echo chamber concept a little bit better than me. So I'd love you to do that for our listeners and for Chris. We had to Google that beforehand.
Absolutely.
Just letting you know. And their impact, I guess, on young coaches and people in the industry.
To be honest, I think that's actually not a value. What's that? That's what I'm looking for. That speaks to Chris's sort of single-minded focus on like his job and not being caught up in the sort of, because that's like the talk of echo chambers is such a, I'm going to use meta again, like a meta sort of conversation. It's people talking about conversations and saying how like it's used as a term to often criticize how, or like that portion over there or that company is an echo chamber. Like it's all just people talking about and regurgitating the same ideas and using the same terminology back and forth. So I think the fact that Chris was sort of unaware of that term, unless I'm not picking up on some sarcasm.
No,
genuinely.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, I will describe echo chambers as best I can. It is basically, I guess, sorry, I've got notifications going off everywhere.
My laptop's gone crazy as my phone rings, and I think we just need to airplane mode it.
Yeah. It's an echo chamber is, I guess, it's some kind of cultural boundary, I guess, that exists where it's like it's a group of people that probably subscribe to certain ideas and are quite isolated from challenging ideas or just the way that other portions of the world or the industry are viewing things. It's very much sort of a concept around the idea of like being surrounded by like yes men and yes women, just like this is the way we think of things. Like, yep, you said the right thing, great. Like, that's exactly, it is all calories, or, it is all whatever the equivalent of sort of reductive thinking in this physiosphere is. Like there is, there's something that you say that gets claps and applauses from all those around you. But the question for me is like, are we actually thinking about the concept correctly? Like, are we actually getting closer and closer to some kind of truth on the matter? Yes, social approval can be used as a proxy for that, because say if you've got 100 people who agree with your opinion versus 10 people who agree with your opinion, then you've got, that's an indication that 100 people's life experience and perception of the world does kind of align with the way that you're viewing things versus 10. So like that is, again, a great indication that you're onto something, but it's not a perfect measure. So we can't be just basing our perception of the world and what we think to be true and what we think is knowledge or useful just based on everyone around us going, yeah, that's great. Because yeah, if you are just being surrounded by people who are telling you you know everything, or you say all the right things, then odds are you are probably in an echo chamber.
So being in this theoretical echo chamber is then therefore likely to limit your ongoing professional development and learning in that industry. I assume is going to be the downfall of that. And I imagine having this conversation, like you said, you guys, is something you've discussed a lot before. You probably see that quite a lot in the fitness industry. I mean, how do people become aware that, you know, that's how they're getting their knowledge, that they are in a theoretical echo chamber? And then what would be your, I suppose, strategy or advice to break out of that, to further develop your learning and not be stuck in that same sort of cycle?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, because I'm not sure how many of these things that I guess I'm very interested in, I have more of a sort of a natural affinity for, or a bit of like a better intuitive understanding of how to navigate. Like I can definitely just speak about practices that I do, but yeah, I guess the first thing is, I guess I always try to be aware of is that what would be the common failure modes, or what would I perceive to be the downfall of whatever current belief or, you know, information gathering system that I'm implementing at the moment. You know, if I say I'm really hot on the idea of, you know, refeeds and diet breaks for enhancing fat loss currently, what I need to then go through the process of like, okay, what is the piece of the puzzle that I'm potentially like completely blind to at the moment that could derail this belief? Like if you can't come up with some kind of, you know, concept that can pop your balloon sort of per se, then odds are like you don't have any grounds for believing it. Like everything should be, I guess, believed probabilistically. And if you think that you are 100% onto the answer and nothing can derail that, then yeah, that's an issue. And then I think once you've come up with the idea of, okay, what's possibly the other side to this coin that I'm missing, then you just go and try and find it. Like, and then it seems super simple. Like it's really simple in concept and difficult to do in practice, but yeah, just chase whatever you think is your potential downfall. Like don't run away from it, like get after it. And then it all sort of just works out. I think in the end, it's all about updating. It's just like, oh, okay, I previously believed that too strongly, so I'm going to weaken that a little bit, or I was undervaluing that, I'm going to update and value that a little bit more, or I was a little bit to the left when I should have been more to the right. It's just like, it's just moving around in belief space. And maybe that's another important thing just to say, is it's not jumping categorically from, oh, refeeds are great, to, oh, refeeds are actually useless.
The spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. Just shifting between, you know, 0.0 and 1.0 on the belief spectrum. Like you have infinite quantities that you can hold between those 2 points. And just like you need to get more and more granular at certain points and go, oh, okay, this needs to be nudged in that direction or nudged back in the other. But it's, yeah, it's not categorical. It's always stepwise.
And there's got to be an element of like, you know, like science in general, the fact that we're just trying to, I guess, disprove the way we think about most things regardless. So it's not always about, you know, saying, yes, okay, so calories are the be all end all, so therefore anything that disproves that we throw out immediately. It's the being uncomfortable in the situation of kind of listening to that information, you know, dissecting it and then going, okay, yeah, no, I still believe my previous or the previous knowledge I have, but I've listened to this side of the you know, the argument or the coin. And that's how we can further grow our knowledge base, because you might find some form of nugget within that, you know, that little bit there, or it might actually challenge the way you're thinking originally and then make you want to further your knowledge on that. And again, like through different mediums or people or, you know, sources. No, that's a really, really, really good way of explaining echo chambers. So I do appreciate that.
I think just to expand on that as well, I mean, one of my observations is there's a lot of people, definitely in my world, in the physio world, as well as in the fitness industry, that probably don't have that open-minded approach to almost have the courage to change their mind or something, or potentially change their views and change their biases. It's something that I've heard you talk about previously, in the confirmation bias, where we're seeking out information to confirm our own biases essentially and reinforce our viewpoint rather than have an open mind to change our opinion. I think that is, it has been my observation, rightly or wrongly, that it's probably rife in the fitness industry that people almost place their identity on a certain concept or a certain idea. So they don't want to be open-minded to learning about something that may challenge that particular concept or that particular idea. Is that something you would agree with, Lyndon, or have a different viewpoint on?
No, I certainly would agree with you, Chris. As humans, we're all prone to confirmation bias, and like that is actually, while it's considered a bug of our thinking, like in many ways it makes for efficient modeling and theorizing about the world. Like there's a reason our brain sort of functionality ended up in that way, because you can't walk out the door and then run through every infinite option of why what you think about the world is possibly wrong. You need to just have some kind of conception of like, okay, I believe things to be true and I'm just going to presume they're going to be more and more true. Like that, it's the way our brain functions is very much to simplify the world around us. So that's probably important for people to recognize. Like that's the general trend of our brain, and it's overall useful, but just trying to then step outside that and ensure you're not oversimplifying in comparison to the next person or whoever is probably a good move. But in regards to the fitness industry, I would say of the industries I've paid attention to, how you present yourself, your beliefs are very much your identity in the fitness industry. And it's unfortunate because I think ultimately it is people optimizing for the short term. It's like you can build quite an audience or a reputation if you go hard on some kind of concept that's popular. It's like, I am the IIFYM guy and I'm just going to like spook IIFYM for 2 years, and basically over that time I'm going to build a pretty big audience because there's a lot of people who are big on this. That's their ideology and they're subscribing to. But that gives you so much, like you've invested so much in that concept and built your whole identity around it, that if you begin changing your mind, you risk losing your entire following or everything, or like your business. Like however you've structured your life up until that point is at risk of falling back down if you change your mind. So it's always been my concern that I might like end up doing that, and I don't want to end up in that position. I'm sure we all do it to some degree. Like it's not like I'm this perfect example of someone who can change their mind. Like I'm still way more stubborn than what I should be, and there's innumerable beliefs that I have that I'm probably blind to regarding how wrong they are. But I think it's all just about like stacking the deck in your favor. And I try to minimize how much I identify with certain beliefs, and how much I try to use ideas in the zeitgeist to leverage my own, say, popularity, because that's a social tool we can all use. You start, as I said, spruiking some idea that's hot at the moment and you gain a bit of popularity, but I think you lose touch with the truth the more you do that. And I'd rather stay a little closer to the truth than sort of the popular side of the spectrum.
And mate, that was such a fantastic segue, and you almost answered my next point on the industry's bigots and charlatans. So I was going to ask how you think certain people do end up becoming those, let's say the anti-sugar crowd, or the, you know, the intermittent fasting crew, or, you know, these sort of people. We're not going to use names because obviously we're a very family-friendly podcast and we like to hype, not, you know, bring people down. But, you know, the way in which these people sort of do build their following and then do, I guess, struggle to ever listen to another argument or change even just like a slight percentage of their viewpoint, that sums up really nicely how they get caught in that trap. Obviously, there's also financial gain, but you know, it does become you know, very difficult to then leave that, or listen to someone else, collaborate with someone else.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and I'll just mention quickly, the reason I was smiling when you said that is, if you know, sort of like the concept of like monkeys on typewriters, whereas if you sort of had like 100 monkeys and you just let them, you know, let them type until the end of time, then eventually they just like through random processes alone, one of them would like type out all of Shakespeare's books in order. I was kind of thinking, I was just like, man, if I ramble long enough, I will answer JY's next question.
You knew what was coming. You were just like, here we go. I know. We've got that like telepathy going through. Yeah. Like, sitting there just like, what?
To answer your question, sorry. I think ultimately it's about incentives. And this is something that we don't have to speak about on the sort of the industry, profession or career levels, like just like life is incentives. Yeah, behavior is very much dictated by incentives. You know, when Chris is working with someone and trying to get them to adhere to their rehab protocol, or they're trying to, you know, he's trying to get them back in the field in 6 weeks, but he knows if they don't adhere, they could be out for 6 months. Like, he needs to design the kind of the world around this person, or like engineer their thoughts to some extent to be incentivized by adhering. It's, you know, how can I portray this rehab program as a stepping stone to what they want? And that whole concept of incentives is really important, I think. And it's not about you know, misleading people. It's just about, yeah, highlighting what they value and what they want and how you can help with that process. But in regards to the industry, yeah, I think we see it's not necessarily bad people. It's, I think, yeah, just ultimately like bad incentives. It's super easy to portray yourself in one way on social media. So the incentive to be authentic or honest is decreased. You know, you can make pretty substantial financial gain. So there's, yeah, it's like the incentive for money. And yeah, it's, I guess, I don't really have a concrete answer to like what the problem is or what we can do about it, but it's not entirely surprising that people end up doing these things, I think. I would just be, yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, I'd be more like, just be pleased you can see it, I guess. Like, if you're, to some extent, like, it's a given that people are going to do dumb things. And if you can count a few people who are doing dumb things, rather than just being like, what idiots, be like, well, there's at least 3 people over there doing dumb things. Maybe that decreases my chance of being a dumb person.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Like, yeah, like, if I can't see any dumb people around me, I might be the dumb person.
I like it. And I think like, it's a good point. I think like it's a bit of a team sport aspect to it as well. And the fact that like everyone wants to be a part of a community, everyone wants to be a part of a team. And if people are doing dumb shit, well, you know, they're having fun doing it. Maybe you'll go do some dumb shit too. And I think, you know, trying to argue with, say, for example, flat earthers, it's like there's a whole community of these people that, you know, vibe off each other. And let's go back to Echochambers. But they end up with that sort of, no, the earth is flat, and like all these people around me agree that it is flat and this is why. And, then it ends up being this huge community. I think that does lead to some of these, these sort of almost like fabricated concepts, whether right, whether wrong. I think, the three of us are quite good at listening to information and interpreting it in our own way. But for some people, it's, the tribe sort of speaks for them rather. And there's always a leader of the tribe as well. So it starts at the top. But today, obviously, we're speaking about thinking in the fitness industry and knowledge. And one of the biggest concepts, I think, in coaching, which I want to sort of refer back to, obviously at the moment your role was a little bit different, but most people would know Lyndon the coach, and being one of the, and I can speak for myself, but one of the best coaches I know, just to pump you up a little bit more so your head's as big as your glutes. The biopsychosocial model is something that we speak about a lot, and I think is getting a fair bit of traction now in the mainstream. But basically, we look at the fact that we're all biological animals, okay? We are beings. We have our own way of interpreting things. And then, again, our social environment does impact us. How have you worked in the past with athletes, with general pop, with anybody you have worked with myself, to actually sort of look after those three main pillars? And how do you interpret that model?
Yeah, so I really like the biopsychosocial model as just that, a model. Like, the important thing to understand is all models simplify reality to some extent. Like, they abstract out details, they give an overly simplified description of how reality is. Like, ultimately, reality is messy, people are messy, there's uncountable amounts of forces acting on a single individual, making them do what they do. But the biopsychosocial model is useful in the sense that it at least breaks us out of, okay, this is just the purely biological lens to view someone through. Like, James does what he does because of, say, genetic reasons or blood glucose reasons, or, whatever sort of biological reason you want to put on it. The biopsychosocial model gets us out of that and goes, no, there's biological forces, and there's psychological forces, and there's social forces. And that's really useful because, ultimately there's not one single thing that you can tell someone to think to help them think about problems better. But useful thinking tools, and that's what I think ultimately the biopsychosocial model is like, useful tools are, just those which decrease your likelihood of being like overly confident on a single cause or even a few causes. If like, you've got someone who's, you're struggling to get some kind of outcome out of them. You've got a client who wants to lose weight, or, you've got a client who wants to make their shoulder more robust than it's ever been so they can get through a whole footy season. We as practitioners, I think, are especially guilty of just thinking in the biological sense. It's like, okay, what are, the connective tissue related issues to this person's shoulder? Like, why is their shoulder always popping out? But we can then, get outside of that and then go, well, there might be some psychological issues there as well. They, every second or third time they're supposed to do their rehab, they're actually feeling like their shoulder's a little bit sore, and they're overly concerned about it. So then they skip their rehab, and that, ultimately might end up in causing biological issues downstream. But there's something that might need to be addressed on the psychological sense, or even in the social sense. Like, maybe at some level they believe it's cool to have, war stories and injuries from football. And it's like, on one level they think, oh, I want to get this shoulder fixed. But on another, they like to be the guy around the club who's in a sling. And just like getting people coming up to them and going, oh, you okay? What'd you do this time?
That you, mate?
So
is that you?
Is that me?
You're down at Panola?
Mate, the trainers at Hampton Rovers tell me that you're getting 6 rubs every quarter. So I think that's you more than anyone, JY.
Hey, it works. I'm just gonna sack and get a Theragun. So. That's a good point, Lyndon. I think like something that you do really well, Chris, pump you up now, because I'm pumping everyone up, is you look at that, I guess, that psychological aspect of pain more so than just the fact that it hurts. So it's
and yeah, I mean that, yeah, like Lyndon said, you know, he gave a great example from my world, but the biological focus definitely in healthcare is so dominant. There could always be an argument to change it to the psychosocial bio model, you know, so we're not necessarily prioritizing the bio, which a lot of the time, you know.
Did we just start that?
Well, maybe we did.
Trademark now. What's the date?
Chilling the fat
21st of April 2021, 10:49.
Showing the fat exclusive. But yeah, I mean, the biological model is something that so many of us, you know, hone in on and have really, you know, that, you know, just that bias towards it, and just don't. I suppose it's probably our tertiary education, the formal qualifications, and especially in my industry, that naturally bias towards the biological, naturally biases away from the psychological and social components of injury management, you know, health management or fitness or whatever it may be, because that's where our biases lie in our education. That's where our strengths are. Whereas, you know, there's so much of a psychological component, I know, in my world to physical health and pain and injuries that people experience. And I'm not necessarily an expert in that, but I've been forced to learn and to educate myself in the impact that, you know, the psychological realm has on physical health and physical conditions and pain. And it is so important. And in the fitness industry, it's the same, you know, working towards goals. If someone wants to lose weight or gain muscle or whatever, you know, it's not just, okay, here's the program, here's a plan, go away and do it, because they've got to be able to fit that into their social environment, their living environment, their psychological mindset, readiness, motivations, habits, preparedness, whatever it may be. So, it's such an important topic, and it's something you summarize really well in.
Yeah, I think well, thank you for that. It's been interesting to observe, I guess, the physio industry, Chris, like personally, because I feel like you as a practitioner have changed a lot over, say, the 5 years that I've known you, and you as a coach as well, Jimmy. Like this is a credit to both of you. But I feel like the physio industry has changed so much around you as well, Chris. Like, if not only, have you changed within it, and maybe you might have a different perspective of this and you feel like there's a lot of dogma there that isn't changing and should, but I know at least what I thought the physio industry was like or about, say, 5 years ago, and what it is now, it seems quite different. And yeah, I'm not sure. Do you feel like that is true? Or
I would certainly agree, but I'm curious to hear, your observations as to why that is, as you know, as an outsider, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I would potentially hypothesize that some aspects of the industry might fear that, like, the writing's on the wall, and that there is I would say there is, I'll put it like this. There are people who are physios, and, you know, they might be quite vocal, you know, about their ideas, and they might be better classified as sort of like pseudoscientific physios, and they're using sort of physio nomenclature and terms, but in that really pseudoscientific sense. And I think a large portion of the industry possibly is trying to distinguish themselves from those people and not get dragged down with them and go, no, we're not going to go the way of, you know, the chiros and stuff like that. Like, we are a scientific discipline, and we are willing to update our beliefs and how we deal with people. That's my little personal theory. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I do. I do definitely agree with you. It's something that, I mean, like you said, a few minutes ago, I've definitely completely changed many of my beliefs and practices throughout my 8 years working in the industry now, which is, as I said, we sort of touched on that a little bit earlier, and just to revert back, is something that, to be a really good evidence-based practitioner, well, I suppose in any field, you need to have that open mindedness to be able to say, okay, I can change my mind. I can reflect on my practice from 5 years ago, and there's certain things I was doing then that I thought was best practice at the time, but I'm no longer doing. And there's things that I'm doing now that I absolutely believe to be best practice that I'm sure in 5 years will change once again. And I think that's really important. And that's not a swipe on anyone to be changing, developing as they move along in their career. I mean, we sort of didn't plan to talk about the physio industry today, so we're sort of sidetracked there a little bit. But I do agree with you, Lyndon. I think there's also almost an identity battle in our industry. We've spoken on the podcast before and on another episode with Brenton Eggleston. If you haven't listened to that, go and have a listen to that. We spoke about the manual therapy versus exercise debate, so the hands-on treatment versus active rehabilitation. In the physio world, has been massive, and that's one that leads into almost the identity crisis, whereas there are a handful of physios that are saying that we want to be completely evidence-based and we want to be completely hands-off for that reason, because the manual therapists don't have the scientific background and it is more potentially a pseudoscience. But at the same time, we don't want to be then losing our identity and sort of falling away from, potentially looking inferior to the chiropractors or the osteopaths or the myotherapists of the world, who arguably are more hands-on manual therapy based. Whereas on the other hand, it's like, well, if we're completely throwing that part of our profession away and not being any hands-on, and we're purely diagnostics and active rehabilitation, well, then are we losing our identity to the sports scientists and the exercise physiologists of the world? And if we're going too far in either one direction, well, where do we sit as a profession?
But it's also, I think it's the same within the training sphere, where originally the whole PT concept was you come in, you sweat, you lose a bit of weight, you get fitter, however that be. Now we've got all these different caps on. We're more, towards the sort of therapist almost, where we're discussing with clients and getting them involved rather than telling them what to do, or, that it's all about the training session that they're completing. And, a lot of people still sign up to training or come and contact, trainers because they want that sweat. And then we're sitting here going, well, okay, let's look at, all these different, psychological aspects of, let's look at your childhood. Let's talk about your parents. Like, you're learning about the client, and they're sitting there going, bro, I just want to sweat. I just want to lose 5 kilos, and we're not going to get there by talking about all these stresses and etc. So we lose people to the F45s and the body fits. And I think it's a bit of an industry problem. As we grow and evolve, we sort of still have the trailing elements of evolution. You know what I mean? Like, there's still those things back behind us where people are sort of looking at and going, but isn't that what it's all about? And it's like, what's that bird that still has wings but doesn't fly? There is a bird that still has wings. Like, it once.
Dodo.
Yeah, so it was dodos, wasn't it? They had wings, couldn't fly, and it's like, why do they have wings? Everyone assumes that this thing should be able to fly. It's like, as the industry sort of evolves, we're still looking at the things at the back end of it and going, well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like, what's all this shit? Like, why is it running on land and all that? I just made that up. I just brought it up.
might not be a dodo, but
yeah, I thought it was
surely.
Emu?
Emus don't fly. They've got massive wings.
I thought emus did fly. Actually, can we edit that out? That's a bit stupid.
yeah.
Oh, this is I don't fly. I knew that.
We're an health and fitness podcast, not an animal zoology podcast.
It could be.
You both raise really good points, though. I'll say 2 things. The first is that, yes, I think we are so scared of change because of how much we often, identify with our previous beliefs and construct our identity around that, or just want to avoid the feeling of not knowing. It's just like, you need to accept that you might not know, and that's what's required to change your beliefs. That's really scary for people. But I love the quote that not all change is progress, but all progress requires change. And that's just something that I constantly try and internalize and be like, okay, yes, you know, if you change your mind or like you change your habits, your lifestyle, people are going to be like, oh, but yesterday you believed that, or like you've changed as a person. It's like, ultimately my job is not to act in the way that makes everyone happy and keeps me the same. It's to get better at my job, to be a better person, to just progress my knowledge. They're the values I hold. So I was like, if they're the values I hold, then people are going to comment on my changing. And they're things that I think we've all sort of got to accept. Just like, okay, what's the sharp end of this stick, if this is the stick that I want? The other thing I was going to say in regards to, say, like manual therapy or helping people, you know, really just achieve that sweat is, there's a blog post I really like. It's something like titled, I think it's Scientific Evidence, Legal Evidence, and Rational Evidence. Ultimately, I think as practitioners, we need to be more concerned with that sphere of like rational evidence. Okay, this might have scientific evidence for it. And if it does, great, then I can implement it as a practitioner with a greater degree of confidence. If it doesn't have scientific evidence, you know, massively supporting it, but I have, you know, good reason to believe that it will be net neutral, potentially beneficial, and the research maybe in time will show it to be beneficial, then I should still possibly consider implementing it in my practice. Like, it might be rational for me to do so, even if it isn't, say, like scientific gold standard as of yet. And that's a bit of a gray area. Like, and different practitioners may have different views on that. But what I believe the job of the practitioner is to primarily to like help the individual coming to see them. It's not a pissing contest with other practitioners about who can have the highest gold standard of best practice going on. It's, I am helping people and I'm developing my own theories from the ground up, while the top-down academic evidence is also being filtered down to me. So I think that's, yeah, something we all need to recognize as practitioners a bit.
I really like that. And a concept that we also discussed in a bit more depth in our episode with Brenton was that the whole idea of evidence-based practice, and evidence-based practice is not purely based on science and research. So evidence-based practice, we talk about the sort of three pillars: is one, science and research, two, clinical experience, or, you know, experience in your own industry, whatever that may be, and three is the client or the individual preferences who come in front of you. Do you know what I mean? So it's not purely, like you said, on, you know, who can rattle off the most, you know, systematic review conclusions to say this is the most evidence-based way to do something. Come back to James's point about someone who might be coming to a personal trainer because they want to get a sweat on, not because, you know, for necessarily any other reason. You might, as an evidence-based, you know, science-based, you know, personal trainer or coach, be saying, well, okay, this isn't necessarily the best thing to do for your health or for your goals for X, Y, and Z. But is that being completely evidence-based? Is that doing the best thing by the client if you're not completely opening yourself up to their preferences as well as what the research and science says? So I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Lyndon, on how you sort of do juggle, you know, those sort of sides of the coin when it comes down to client expectations in the fitness world as a coach, and their own sort of, you know, obviously we come back to the biopsychosocial, their own sort of psychological mindset when it comes to what they want to get out of their own fitness or their own health, as well as their sort of social surroundings and preconceptions about what fitness and personal training may be, and tying that into, you know, an evidence-based scientific approach that obviously, you know, is one of your strengths and you're so passionate about.
Yeah, I think an idea that was that's probably still popular, but that I was definitely, say, like raised on, was, as a coach, you want to, you know, give people a mix of what they need and what they want. And I think there's definitely like truth captured in that. But I think probably more so as a practitioner, what you need to work out is whether what they say they want is actually what they want. It's that investigation process of, okay, you're telling me you want to get a sweat on. You're telling me that, you know, you want to leave here like crawling and then sort of throw up in the car park before you, you know, drink your post-workout shake. but like, what is the implications of that you actually want? Like, why do you want that? And it's that sort of going back to go forwards thing. Like, if ultimately they want that because they think that's what must be done in order to grow, a big set of legs or glutes or get shredded, then I need to know that information.
Yeah.
It's not, it shouldn't be this tug of war between, I'll give them a little bit of their 3 giant sets back to back so they feel crap, while also I do another day that's focused on mechanical tension so they can actually grow some muscle. It isn't this what I want for them and what they want for themselves. It's, let's align these so that we're both on the same page. You're understanding why I'm prescribing these things or recommending these things, and I'm understanding why you're asking for what you're asking for. So I think it's that, maybe it's a bit of a dance around the question, Chris, but I think ultimately it's like getting on the same page with the person, and it's very collaborative. And I guess, JY can speak to this point that I guess we try and do stay in touch, and he, we might touch base a few times a week, but he will often say, oh, actually sort of like what I said in my last check-in, actually sort of, that was a fluctuation in mood, or that was, I thought I wanted that, but it turns out I actually want this. And sometimes I'll say, actually, I made a bad call. Like, I thought we should be upping your leg volume, but, now that you've got this issue, we probably should be downing it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, again, we get really wrapped up in just preserving the validity of what we'd said previously. It's like, oh, if I said Jimmy had to up his leg volume, I've got to create this narrative for the next 3 or 4 weeks that that's what he should be doing. And, anything that causes issues relating to that, I need to explain away and say, oh, it's the football that he's doing, or it's you're not doing your rehab that you spoke to Chris about. But I think ultimately just being more willing to engage with the client as an individual who's coming with their own really useful set of knowledge, and both being willing to admit that you may have had things wrong previously, be it months ago or hours ago, and then just explore the territory going forward together.
Yeah. And just to touch on that, sorry, Chris, that was a big inhale of information coming out. Just touching that, and just for our listeners, obviously, Lyndon does coach me. So Lyndon and I work together. Fortunately for us, we are, Lyndon's a lot smarter and more handsome than I am, but I have a very similar way of looking at things on the most of the time. But with some people that I guess coaches work with, it does take a little bit longer, and it is a collaborative effort rather than like you said, that sort of like black and white, like what they want, what they need. And sometimes it is sort of starting like somewhere again, I love spectrums, everything's on a spectrum, but it is starting somewhere and just sort of moving over time towards one end or the other. Okay. And as you sort of like, it's almost like a dose response relationship, as you sort of like give a little bit of like, let's focus on this, or, let's try to, implement a bit of this. It's seeing how that works, and that's the same in language. Like, you might find that you speak in this way to kind of explain a concept and realize that they just don't get it. That doesn't work again. And they, things go backwards, but that's okay, because then you can sort of alter the way in which you communicate or coach that person. And it's something that I do encourage a lot of young coaches to just understand, to sort of like realize that you'll never have someone walk into a session for the first time or a consult and then walk out and you're like, great, here's the next 12 months of your coaching, because everything changes along the way. Okay. Whether that's, again, go look at the biopsychosocial, what the psychosocial bio sort of explanation we had before, but things change for a multitude of reasons. Same as you, Chris, you'll have someone who comes in, they might have an issue, because of X, but, Y impacts it further. But in the first session, there was no Y, there was only X. And I think that's why, change and I'm going on a real tangent here, but change and all this sort of does happen over a longer period of time rather than, in that sort of like one moment.
I'll just jump in and say I do really enjoy and appreciate your sort of analytical style to thinking, learning in your practice, Lyndon, and I'm sure our listeners are certainly going to enjoy that as well, which is why we're obviously stoked to have you with us today. But that sort of leads us into a couple of your own projects, which I'm keen to hear a little bit more about from you. So the first one is your website, thereforethink.org. I'm not even going to summarise it, mate. I just want to hear from you what Therefore Think is all about.
Yeah, at the moment it's about not posting anything. At the moment it's just like this thing that operates the back of my mind being like, hey, you got to post something on there like eventually. But yeah, so I guess to sort of link it in with my description of the coach client process just previously, I really do see, helping someone as an investigation process. You're both going through it together. You don't, as a client, go to a coach and the coach goes, this is what you need. And like, that's almost become a bit of a gold standard, perceived gold standard in the industry. It's like, oh, they walked in and I summarized them within 30 seconds. I knew they needed this, they needed glute work, and I fixed their squat within a 30-minute session. It's like, I'm way more attracted to the practitioner who's like, actually, after 8 months of working together, I'm still building a model for this person, but I think I'm getting closer and we've had some good improvements along the way. So that's what I think of the coach client relationship. And I guess ultimately, like, that's what I'm trying to do with the blog. It's like, I'm not writing about more general life and philosophical, political, or whatever things, thinking, hey, here's the ideology that is correct and you should all believe it because it's correct. It's, here's what I think based on, sort of like these resources. Tell me what you guys think. Like that's the whole kind of idea of just like, I'm just trying to construct arguments and ideas, putting them out there and then getting feedback on them.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately I really like the writing process. I feel like it helps me assimilate my own experiences and comb through them. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
I think Therefore Think, that was a mouthful. Therefore Think to me does seem like, your opportunity to sort of get these concepts that you want out into the public and to sort of, let people interpret it in their own sort of way. It is a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to sort of, I found it, go down some rabbit holes. And even though obviously you haven't posted as much recently, there is plenty of content going back. One of your best posts I know was, I think it was about a year ago. It was your one on productivity. It was a little bit more linear, but yeah, if anybody hasn't read it, go back onto it.
We'll whack a link in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll chuck a link up. That was a fantastic, I think it was a three-parter.
I think it ended up being like 6, to be honest.
It actually,
yeah, it was a very unproductive way to speak about productivity.
I think there was a bit in it when you mentioned that. You were kind of like, yeah, this isn't like super productive, but it was but really, really, really good post, and especially with the 2020 fun that we all had. That was I got a lot out of that. I really, really did. More so the concept of thinking about being productive and what it really is, rather than how to be productive. So thank you for that, Lyndon.
The other project of yours, the other medium to share your wonderful knowledge and your analytical brain is your podcast, PhilosophyAu. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please, Lyndon?
Yeah, so PhilosophyAu is a little project with, I guess, a mutual friend of all of ours. I think, yeah, everyone met Josh along the way somewhere. But yeah,
Right.
Josh Kakataki. He and I were like, we've always been, I guess, interested in a lot of these ideas and spoke about them a lot along the way for years and years. And then ultimately during lockdown from COVID, Josh and I were going on 3-hour walks, just like leaving our phone in the car and feeling so good for just having these big, long-winded discussions about what we were thinking about. And yeah, we sort of just had often spoken about starting a podcast, and then we just, eventually just bit the bullet and did it. So yeah, it's hard to define exactly what PhilosophyAu is. I think even the sort of the philosophy term makes it sound more esoteric or reductive than what it is. It's like, it's ultimately just a couple of guys who are like thinking and just talking about their experiences a bit. But yeah, I think maybe to summarize, or I've summarized both the activities, but maybe the purpose of them is because I still see this as a very exploratory phase of my life. I really don't, or I hope I'm nowhere near the level of things that I'll know in 50 years. Like, I really do see that I've still got a vast gap to cover. And I think one of the ways that will help me bridge that gap is by putting more content out, getting more feedback on it, as well as just exploring different mediums of, information sort of creation and consumption. You guys have got a podcast, and it's like you're exploring the digital sphere to a greater extent. And I don't think having a positive influence these days is just about having an analytical brain or a good idea. It's also having the ability to express it and get it out there to people and share it.
Yeah.
So that's sort of why I'm trialing those things. And I'm sure you guys have learned a lot out of starting a podcast as well. So
Very similar to us.
We'll get a link in the show notes for PhilosophyAu as well. You've been very generous with your time, and we've ticked over just over an hour, but I've got two sort of quick questions I'd love to hear your thoughts on to finish our chat today. Quite simply, if you can give us one thing that you would change about the fitness industry and why, and our listeners would love to hear it.
Ooh, one thing I would change.
Tough one without notice.
Sorry?
The tough one without notice.
Yeah. Maybe I would say hiding the amount of followers someone has.
Nice.
Wow.
That's a good answer.
Why?
Like, because I think it would function in a similar way to the way that hiding the likes has. And ultimately some credibility may be lost along the way, but I would hope that encourages people to be more of their own, to use a very nerdy term, like Bayesian updaters. Like, okay, I can't just go, oh, there's an authority, I'm going to start believing them because they have X amount of followers. It's, oh crap, like all these people look the same to me, from a following sort of reputation standpoint. How am I going to decipher where the truth is on the matter? So that might be a bit optimistic, but I would hope.
You know what? I reckon it's probably more likely we're going to have research papers soon that's going to say, B. Schoenfeld and how many followers they have, than we are to get rid of followers. So I like your optimism, and I think that's a fantastic answer. But we do live in the 21st century, don't we?
That's a great answer.
Lyndon,
Sorry, I was just going to say that's very insightful, James. We do live in the 21st century.
We do. I sometimes like to remind people and just remind myself that we are in the computer age. I still write things down rather than use my phone. So, hey, mate, we're not going to keep you any longer now because you've got a furniture delivery coming. So your time's precious, we know. We'll finish up with one last question. Tomato sauce, do you put it in the fridge or do you put it in the pantry?
In the pantry.
And why?
What a man.
And why?
I don't like things that jar me too much. Like I'm a little bit obsessive about how I construct my life, and many people have commented along that on the way about that. But I don't like putting cold sauce on hot food because it just confuses me too much. And I'm too aware of where like the hot bit in the pie is and the cold bit of the sauce. And I'm thinking about like, ultimately I've just got this yin yang image, and I'm just like, a pie shouldn't be this yin yang image in my mind's eye. It should be just this enjoyable experience. And if I'm thinking about where the bloody hot spots in the food are and the cold spots of the sauce, then this is an issue.
But I just want to ask, like, everyone says that seems to be a very common answer, not quite that in depth, but that contrast. How cold are people's fridges? Because, like, I don't know about you guys, but I have mine set to like, it's got like numbers out of 1 to 5. I've got it set to like 4.
I'm going to tell you how cold my fridge is.
Oh, yes. This is chewing with that exclusive.
I love this.
The coldness of Lyndon's fridge. That's a good fridge too.
3 degrees. Freezer is minus 19. Would that be right?
See, okay, so if you had the sauce in the freezer, then that would make sense. The contrast, but 3 degrees, right?
3 degrees.
We get down to about 9. We get down to about 9 in the winter in Melbourne. The pantry doesn't get that, that warm.
I love your answer, Lyndon. I love the fact that I'm a pantry man, and we've had 4 guests on so far, and it's 2 pantry, 1 fridge, and 1 on the fence. So
who's on the fence?
Franson's on the fence.
How do you mention the sauce on the fence?
You mentioned the contrast, because that is the exact reason that I dislike the sauce being in the fridge, because that contrast of hot and cold sauce isn't great. It's the equivalent of like you get a frozen meal out of the freezer and you put it in the microwave and you get all these hot bits and then there's cold bits in the middle. Like, that contrast is just not what you want. Although I would argue the one exception to the rule would be cold ice cream with hot apple pie.
So then you're just contradicting yourselves, guys. So
I think I'm correct in saying as well, fruit is actually more flavorful when it's at a warmer temperature. Like I guess it would be a chemical or like the way the chemical reaction, like cold temperatures slow down chemical reactions. And I think like the sauce is genuinely less flavorsome at a colder temperature. So you can extract more from your sauce by keeping it a warmer temperature.
Then why is Ice Magic so delicious?
Oh, that's a good question.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Chris.
No, I just wanted to say for the 3rd or 4th time, I love the way you think, Lyndon, especially the answer to that question, which is the most important of today. I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of this conversation, mate. So thanks so much for being so generous with your time and chilling with that with JY and I today.
Thanks so much, guys. It was a pleasure. I got a ton of respect for you both, so I appreciate it.
As we do with you, mate. Thank you very much for giving us your time.